Anybody besides me eat shmura matzah last night? Wow. It's impressive stuff. I know no other way to put it. It's really impressive. You go to those pizza places where they have the 900-degree oven and they can make a pizza in like 60 seconds? It's not like that. We start our service this Shabbat morning and this Chag for the first day of Pesach, as we start every service on page 146 in our Sidur Chadash. If you are able, please rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasek v'vina lavchin ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mabish arubim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokev kifufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rakah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa li kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher echin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten layayef koach. If you're standing, you may be seated as our service continues at the top of page 148. Udneinu hayom uv'chayom lecheinu l'chesed u'lerachamim b'nechol u'v'nechol u'v'neinu v'tikmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chasadim tovim le'amo Yisrael. Our service continues in the middle of page 150. Ashreinu matov chakenu u'manayim goralenu u'mayafa yerushatenu. Ashreinu she'anachnu mashkimim u'marivim erev v'avoker ve'omrim pa'amayim b'chol yom. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Kadesh et shemcha magdishei shemecha v'kadesh et shemcha be'olamecha u'vishuatcha tariv et abiyah karnenu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh et shemcha barabim. Our service continues with the Psalm for Shabbat, which can be found in our Siddur on page 168. Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Shabo hayu alevim omrim beveit hamikdash. Mizmor shir leyom haShabbat. On Yinevum v'sevad shenim v'ranim yiyu lehagid ke'ashar Adonai tzuri v'lov la'tabo. We turn forward in our Siddur to Psalm 30 on page 174. Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid. Afaktu mispedela macholi, patakti sakivat azani simcha, lamani yismacha kavod v'lo yedom, Adonai Elohai leolam odeka. Our service continues on page 180 with Baruch She'amar. Please rise if you are able. Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reishit, Baruch omer v'yoseh, Baruch ozer u'mekayim, Baruch mirachem al ha'aretz, Baruch mirachem al ha'briyot, Baruch mishalem sachar tov livrei ahav, Baruch elad v'gayam lanetzach, Baruch podeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, ha'ela avarachamanu mecholav b'fi amohu, mishubach umfor b'shalom chasidav v'avadav, uv'shirei David avdecha, nehalelcha Adonai Eloheinu b'shvachotu b'zmirot, nigadelcha u'neshabecha n'farcha, v'nazkir shimcha v'namlechecha malkeinu Eloheinu, yachid chei ha'olamim, Melech Mishubach Umfor Adei Shemo Hagadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal Batish Bachot. If you're standing, you may be seated as we turn forward in our Siddur to page 190 for Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha, Odi Hallelujah Selah. Ashrei Am Shakakalo, Ashrei Am Shadonai, Levav David. Tehillat Adonai Yadaber Pivi Varech Abasar Shem Kachol Elam Vaed Va'anachnu Nevarech Yamei Ata V'Ad Olam. Hallelujah. Turning to page 192, Psalm 146. Hallelujah, 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 Nafshi Ad Adonai. Adonai Shomer Kirim Yatom V'Alma Yoded V'Derech Rashani Yavet Yimloch Adonai Leolam Elohai Etzion Lidor V'Ador. Hallelujah. Psalm 150 on page 194. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 Bekacho, hallelujah, hallelujah, Birkia Uzo, hallelujah, 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 Big Vurotav, hallelujah, hallelujah, Kirov Gudlo, hallelujah, 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 Beteka Shofar, hallelujah, hallelujah, Menevel Vechinor. Hallelujah, 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 Betofu Machol. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Meaning Veugav. Hallelujah, 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 b'tzirtzilei shama, hallelujah, hallelujah, b'tzirtzilei trua, kol haneshama techalel ya, hallelujah, kol haneshama techalel ya, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai le'olam amen ve'amen. Baruch Adonai mitzion shochin Yerushalayim. Hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael oseh niflot levado. Uvaruch shem kavodo le'olam. Vayelem elei kavodo et kol haaretz. Amen ve'amen. We turn in our Siddur now to page 214 for Nishmat Kol Chai. Nishmat Kol Chai, Tivarech et Shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu. Let us read in unison the middle of page 215 in English to the bottom of the page. If our mouths were filled with song as water fills the sea, and our tongues rang with your praise as tirelessly as the roaring waves, if our lips offered adoration as boundless as the sky, and our eyes shone in reverence as brightly as the sun, if our hands were spread in prayer as wide as eagle's wings, and our feet ran to serve you as swiftly as the deer, we would still be unable to thank you adequately for the smallest fraction of the numberless bounties you have bestowed upon our ancestors and upon us. Our service continues at the top of page 216. As this is a festival service, our service will continue with the last two lines on page 216. Ha'el b'ta'atzumot uzecha ha'gadol b'frot shemecha ha'gibor la'netzach v'yanora b'norotecha ha'melech ha'yoshev ha'keseram v'nisacha. Our festival service continues with Shochenad, led by Rabbi Barnett, starting on page 218.
Thank you so much there, Mark. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Let me see here if I wonder if Jason is still there. Jason, you are? Yeah, good. Could you bring this up maybe just a little bit in volume for us there? Or for me, for us all together. Voila. So I lost my page here, Mark. What?
Page 218.
Okay, great. So on page 218, we then continue with Shochenad. Shochenad maro v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv ranu tzadikim b'Adonai la'isharim navati lam b'fi sharim tit'alal u'v'divrei tzadikim tit'barach u'v'leshon chasidim tit'romam ובקרב קדושים תתקדש ובמקלות רבות עמך בית ישראל. ברינה יתפאר שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור. שכן חובת כל היצורים לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו. נודו להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, ולקלס על כל דברי שירו ותשבחות. דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך, ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. היה למלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים וארץ, כי לך נהיה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו. שיר ושבחה והלל וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח וגדולה וגבורה, תהילה ותפארת קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודאות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אל חיי העולמים. And we're going to continue on page 224, please. Page 224 with the blessing after the Baruch Hu. For this, you don't necessarily need to face the eastern wall, but you can if you'd like to. There's no prohibition. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom, uvorei et hakol. And please be seated. So sometimes in other settings, when we have a lot of people, the rabbi gives a little bit of a little drash, and then after that little learning of Torah, then at that point, there is a Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Kaddish of the rabbis, an opportunity to praise God for that. But I'm going to nonetheless take a little bit of liberty here and give a small commentary on this blessing. So again, this is on page 224. What is the English for this prayer? Prayers are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who forms light and creates darkness, who ordains the harmony of all creation. So we have the creation of light and darkness, okay? Those basically are in itself morally neutral, in the sense of, often we associate light with enlightenment, and that's beautiful. But in and of itself, look, there's nothing that's inherently, even though sometimes, I suppose, in the human psyche, there is a fear with little children, of fear of sometimes going to sleep at night, or the darkness, what they behold, but that is not necessarily any sign of evil or anything. But what is the next phrase? So, Yotzer or v'rei choshech, he creates light and creates darkness. Again, let's just pretend for the time being that's morally neutral. Oseh shalom makes peace, well-being, completeness. Uvorei et hakol, and creates everything in creation. Now, originally, this prayer was a little bit different. It was actually uvorei et hara, and God creates evil. In other words, not just goodness, but he creates evil. Specifically, why was it in that form originally? Well, at one point, specifically in Persia, there was a dialogue. Not just a dialogue, it was more than a dialogue. The religion of Zoroastrianism worshipped two gods, not one. One of goodness and one of absolute evil. And so to counter that, the rabbis, and by the way, that notion of, that kind of contextual struggle between good and evil was not even probably originating with the Persians there, but it certainly developed under the philosophy of Zoroastrianism. So to counter that, the rabbi said, no, evil is not a great thing, and it seems to have sometimes a power of its own, but it itself was created by God. And so that's why they specifically put in uvorei et hara, and God creates the evil. But then later on they changed it back that God creates everything. So it's sort of an historical note there of the way liturgy can develop, and quite an interesting one. That having been said, on page 226 we'll continue. I'll keep davening for the next paragraph, page 226. At the bottom of page 226. In kerkecha ve'in tzulatecha, efes birticha u'midome lach. In kerkecha Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh, ve'in tzulatcha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes birticha golenu limot HaMashiach, ve'in dome lecha Moshiachenu, litchiyat hametim. On page 228, we'll continue with El Adon. And we'll do the, since we have a Hallel service here today, we are going to do a Hallel. We're just going to do the first stanza and then going down to Pa'er. El Adon al kol ha'masim baruch umvorach b'fi kol neshama godlo v'tuvo ma'ale olam dat u'tvuna sovavim oto per v'chavod notelim lishmo tzolav rina lezecher nalchuto kara leshemesh vayizrach or ra'al hid kinsurat halvana שבח ונותנים לו על כל צבא מרום תפארת וגדולה שרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש. Page 230. לילה של שבת מכל המעשים. We continue now, page 234 and 235. Tiparak surenu malkeinu v'kolenu borei kedushim. Yishtabach shimcha la'ad malkeinu. And on page 235, this reading on the left, the holiness of God, corresponds to the form of the Kedusha that is found in this section of the liturgy, which is the Kedusha de Yotzer, the sanctification for the creation of the lights and the morning lights. Therefore, page 235, let's read responsively on the left. We've had a request to include a few more English readings in our Saturday service, so that's why we're doing this. O God, whom we acclaim as holy, human reason cannot fathom you. Though we strive to sense your presence, yet you remain ever above and beyond us. Though you reveal yourself in the marvels of nature and have manifested yourself in the glory of your law, yet are these revelations but as flashes of lightning from the cloud of mystery which ever enshrouds you. In vivid imagery, prophets and psalmists of old sought to convey their reverence and awe, drawing visions of you enthroned on high, with hosts of heavenly beings singing your praise. For the words of mortals are so woefully wanting, mere human utterance so sadly inadequate. Our limitations make all praise seem trivial. Our impurity sullies even noble speech. So let angels pure beyond human attainment adore you and imagined seraphim uttering their flaming praise. Let our prayer rise to you on their wings. Let their mouths give voice to it in heavenly harmonies. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is filled with God's glory. And so we continue here, and that's just a beautiful, beautiful reading. We continue now on page 236. Morchadash al Zion ta'ir, v'nitkei kulanu mirad le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer ha'meorot. On page 238, Ava Rabbah. Ava Rabbah, Adonai Eloheinu, Chemla gedela v'techa chamalta aleinu. Avira v'mavin l'kinu v'borotenu shemat כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. And on page 240, we continue with V'havi'enu. V'havi'enu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz, v'tolichenu kunu li'aretzenu, כי אל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת מקונם בלשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סל באמת, להודות לך ולייחדך ביאהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל ביאהבה. Amen. So if you haven't gathered the four corners of the tzitzit, go ahead and do so. Now with the Shema, we continue, page 142. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Ve'avta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לו תותפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך. And we continue with the intermediate paragraphs of the Shema, continuing on page 244. On page 246, we'll continue with the concluding phrase, Lema'an tizkeru. Lema'an tizkeru v'asitem ekol mitzvotai v'item kedushim le'eloheichem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzaiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim le'olechem le'Elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem. Adonai Elohechem, Emet. On page 248, Dor v'dor kayam u'shmo kayam v'chiso nachon u'malchuto v'yamanoto la'ad kayamet. On page 248, 4 lines from the bottom. Emet ve'munach chok v'lo ya'avor, emet sha'atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohe avotenu, malkeinu melech avotenu, go'aleinu go'el avotenu, yotzreinu, tzur yeshotenu, podeinu matzilenu me'olam shemecha, en Elohim zulatecha. Page 250, Ezrat avotenu atau me'olam. Page 252. Le'alelion baruch u'mvorach Moshe v'nei Israel lechanu shira v'simcha rabah v'yamru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh norat yilot הוסף אליהם שירה חדשה שיבחו גלים לשמך על שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובטחנו בך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני גאל Yisrael. So because this is a festival, we don't do the same Amidah that we do on the regular Shabbat. Instead, we will turn to page 272. Page 272 for the Shachrit Amidah for festivals. Actually, let's continue with the one that includes the Imahot, which will be found on page 273. Adonai Svatai Tiftach, Ufi Hagit Tilatecha. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל העליון, גומל לחסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו ביעביו, מלך עוזר ומשיח ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה, רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמנת לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. Page 274. נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וכרזל זאב יאמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אז בקול רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול, מתנסים ומצרפים למתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ממקומך מלכנו תביא את There's a concluding phrase at the bottom of 274, the bottom of the third paragraph there. Einenu tirena malkutecha kadavar hamur b'shirei uzecha al yedei David Mashiach tzidkecha yimloch Adonai leolam Elohai Tzion ledor vador hallelujah. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש ושבחך. אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. We continue then with the remainder of the Amidah going forward on page 276. Do remember to add the words in brackets, because it would be relevant for today, Shabbat, coinciding then with the first day of Passover. And at this time, I'm going to continue on page 288. On the festivals, we have the celebration. It's a time of rejoicing and a celebration. So what we do is we chant a Hallel service, and that is found then on page 288. So there are some congregations where they do, in fact, I would say maybe even the majority of traditional, certainly the majority of traditional congregations in the conservative movement, they stand during Hallel. But I'm going to say, if you want to stand, you may, but you don't have to. I'm going to say that for today here, for this congregation. Nonetheless, we begin on page 288. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu likro et Hallel. Et Hallel. Hallelujah, 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 Adonai, hallelujah, et Shem Adonai. Mikimi mi afardal me ashpot yarim evlion, lo shivim nidivim im nidivei amo, moshivi akeret habayit, Hem habanim smecha, hallelujah. B'tzeid Yisrael mitzrayim, Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez. Hayta liuda l'kodsho, Yisrael mamsherotav. So there's a melody that goes for Hayam on this is Psalm 114, and it's done sort of antiphonally here. I'll try it, and you can sing the phrase after me. It goes, I think, like Hayam, Hayam, Ravayanus, Ravayanus, Hayarden, Hayarden, Yisov Lechor, He'arim, Rakdu Kelim, Gevaot, Gevaot, Kivnei Tzon, Malachayam, Kitanus, Hayarden, Tisov Leachor, Eharim, Tirkedu Chelim, Gevaot, Gevaot, Kivnei Tzon, Milifnei Adon, Choli Aretz, Milifnei Elohai Yaakov, Aufchi Hatzur, Agamayim, Chalamish, Chalamish, Levaynomayim. And on page 293, let's read this responsively. This is a psalm which really is in many ways a parody or making fun of idolatrous practices. To trust in the Lord, our help and shield. Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name bring glory because of your mercy and your faithfulness. Why should the nations say, where is their God? When our God rules the heavens, doing the divine will. Their idols are mere silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths that cannot speak. They have eyes that cannot see. They have ears that cannot hear. They have noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel. They have feet but cannot walk. Their throats can make no sound. Those who fashion them shall be like them, as shall all who trust in them. O Israel, trust in the Lord, who is your help and your shield. O house of Aaron, trust in the Lord, who is your help and your shield. You who revere the Lord, trust in the Lord, who is your help and your shield. And I'll do the concluding phrase there. Beit Aaron v'chud Adonai, Ezram u'maginam hu, Yirei Adonai v'tchu Adonai, Ezram u'maginam hu. And on page 294, we continue with the psalm there. The first line is chanted individually or by myself, and then will lead us into the melody. Adonai zicharanu yevarech et Beit Yisrael, yevarech et Beit Aaron, yevarech Yirei Adonai, haktanim im ha'gadolim, Yosef Adonai aleichem, aleichem ve'al b'neichem, Beruchim atem l'Adonai, Osei shamayim ve'aretz, shamayim l'Adonai, ve'aretz natan livnei adam, lo ametim yahaleluya, ve'lo kol yordei duma, v'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata ve'ad olam, me'ata ve'ad olam. Hallelujah. So special kudos to Mark Davids there for rescuing me on the melody on that one. And if I didn't thank him enough before, I want to thank him again now, also for beginning the services earlier for us. So thank you so much. And we continue page 296. Ahavti Adonai kishma Adonai et kuli tachnunai ki ta'uzno v'mai karav. Et alech lifnei Adonai בארצות החיים, האמנתי כי אדבר, אני עניתי מאוד, אני אמרתי בחפצי, כל אדם כוזב. Page 298. Let's read this one, and actually on 299. Let's do this responsively here. How can I repay the Lord for all the Lord's bounties to me? I will lift up the cup of deliverance and invoke the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of the Lord's people. Grievous in the sight of the Lord is the death of the faithful. O Lord, because I am your servant born of your maidservant, you have removed my chains. To you will I bring an offering of thanksgiving, and will I call upon your name, O Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of the Lord's people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in the midst of Jerusalem. Hallelujah. Nedarai l'Adonai Hashalem, nekdana l'chol amo, v'chatzrot bed Adonai, v'tochecha Yerushalayim. Hallelujah. And in the middle of page 298, we'll continue. Hallelujah. Adonai, kol goyim, shavchu, kol haomim, ki gafar aleinu chasto, ve'emet Adonai le'olam. Hallelujah. Odu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Yomruna Israel, ki le'olam chasto. Yomruna ve'taron, ki le'olam chasto. Yomruna Yirei Adonai, ki le'olam chasto. page 300. Mina meter karadia, aneni meyarchavia. At the bottom of page 300, there are several melodies for this, and the one that's coming to mind is Pitchu li sharei tzedek avovam odeya odeya. Pitchu li sharei tzedek avovam odeya odeya. Ze ashar l'Adonai tzadikim yavohu vo. Ze ashar l'Adonai tzadikim yavohu vo. Page 302. Odeka ki anitani vati lishua. Odeka ki anitani vati lishua. Ze even masu abonim. Haita lerosh pina. Even masu abonim. Haita lerosh pina. Mehet Adonai. Haita zot hi niflat be'einenu. Mehet Adonai. Haita zot hi niflat be'einenu. Ze hayom asa Adonai. Nagila v'nismecha vo. Ze hayom asa Adonai. Nagila v'nismecha vo. An Adonai Hoshiana. An Adonai Hoshiana. An Adonai Hatzlichana. An Adonai Hatzlichana. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Beirachnuchem mibeit Adonai. El Adonai v'yayer lanu. Yisru chag b'avotim ad karnot hamizbeach. And there's another melody for Eliata. Eliata ve'odeka Elohai aromemeka. Eliata ve'odeka Elohai aromemeka. Eliata ve'odeka Elohai aromemeka. Eliata ve'odeka ve'Elohai Elohai aromemeka. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov ki le'olam chasto. On page 304, Yahaleluch Adonai Eloheinu kol amasecha v'chazidecha tzadikim oseret oncha v'chol amcha beit Yisrael b'rina yodu yivarchu yishabechu v'yifaru v'yoromeh v'romemu yatz v'yaritzu v'yaritzu v'yakdishu v'yamlichu et shimcha markenu כי לך טוב להודות, ולשמך תנאי לזמר, כי מעולם ועד עולם אתה אל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מהולל, ותשבחות. Page 306. Excuse me 1 second. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועל מה דברה חילותי וימליך מלכותי, וחייכונו ויומכונו וחי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן, אמן, יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם עולם מעולמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר וידמה ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ותדלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמור אמן אמן תקבל סלותכון ובתכון לכל ישראל קדם אבון דבשמיא ואמור אמן אמן יהי שלום הרבה משמיא וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן amen. So, to make an announcement in advance of next week, I believe we are going to be having a Torah service with full readings. Is that correct as it stands now?
I got that email.
Okay. So we'll be doing that next week. So for this week here, what I thought I would do is give us some highlights of this week's Torah portion, and then go ahead and talk about a little bit about the Haftorah, and then go ahead and chant that for us, or attempt to today. I'd like to invite everyone, please, to turn to page in your Humashim, page 385. Page 385, verse 21. Of course, the Torah section is on the top, and the commentaries in the middle, and then on the bottom. So page 385, verse 21 is where the Torah portion would start for today. So this is a part that, where Moses had been basically commanded by God to make the proclamation that we are going to be reading about right now. So first, basically, he was told about it, and then now he's relating it to the Israelites. So Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. And you take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood that's in the basin, and then use this as a paintbrush, basically. Apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. And none of the Israelites were supposed to go outside of their homes in the morning there, or until the morning. They were sealed in. Just as in so many ways people are sealed in other locations now, they're sealed inside their homes. So on verse 23, it says, "For when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home." And so this is basically to be observed as an institution for all time, for you and your descendants. And I'm not going to go into details, but I cannot but help but think right now of the tragic situation of the 25 million people in Shanghai, China, who are basically in this kind of a situation. It's not Passover for them, but they are sealed inside their homes because of the government declaration of the COVID outbreak there. So you hear their screams on the news. But nonetheless, in this story, basically, it's very interesting, and I want to point out something that is, I think, quite informative and basically very interesting as well. So we read here, "You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and your descendants." And then when you go into the land of Israel, of course, you're supposed to observe this rite. That's what verse 25 says. And then verse 26 says something very interesting. We're going to make this a little bit of a participatory discussion here and see if anyone can get the answer, okay? First, I'm going to read the verse in Hebrew. And "V'hayat ki yamru alechem b'nechem." So when your children shall, basically, say to you, they're talking about the future, "Maha avodah hazot lachem." What is this worship? What is the meaning of this worship to you? Literally, that would be the translation. Or what do you mean by this right is the way it's translated. But really, the actual Hebrew is lachem, to you. What is ma avodah hazot lachem? Does anybody remember that line? For what is this? I'll give it to you in the, what does this worship mean to you? Does anybody remember that? Yes, Mark.
4 sons.
From the 4 sons, that's correct. And which son asked that question?
Third son. Second son.
The second son. And that second son that's the correct answer. And that second son is somehow, sometimes referred to by a specific kind of adjective. The wicked son. Yes. Why is he called wicked? Well, let's go back and see how the Haggadah was put together, right? So they had the section of the Torah, right? The rabbis had the Torah, and somehow this bothered them. Instead of the question being, right, Maha avodah hazot lanu, what is the meaning of this to us? It's lachem. So they used that as a pedagogic insight, to put that as a model inside the Seder itself, and to say, look, what is important about the entire Passover experience? Let's open that question up. What would you say is one of the most important themes of the entire Passover experience? Other than freedom, okay, other than being released from a condition of oppression and slavery. What is the next major theme? The big idea, huge idea. One of the most prevalent ideas in all of Judaism. I'm building it up to increase the sense of frustration, and some of you might not, it's one word. As a matter of fact, Hillel says that without this idea, you're truly missing the mark. What is the key idea? The key idea of Judaism begins with the letter C, C-O, not legal counsel, C-O-M. Commitment is nice, but what are you committing yourself to? C-O-M-M, commandments is good. You commit yourself to the commandments, first of all. C-O-M-M-U. Covenant goes, yes, but that is correct. But we're trying to find the word C-O-M-M-U. We're doing the Scrabble game. Community. Absolutely. What would we be without community? Right? Jewish community. That's the whole message in a way. After, when we think about, right, what does Hillel tell us to say? Right? Einani mili, if I won't speak for myself, who will speak for me? Okay, that's self-interest. That's fine. That's individuals looking after themselves. But when he says then, ve'im ani le'atzmi, but if I'm only for myself, ma'ani, right? If I'm only for myself, what am I? Right? In other words, we have to be more. It's not even a person. We're not even a full person. We're objectified. Ma, and so you notice Hillel says, if im ani le'atzmi, he doesn't say im ani le'atzmi mili, who am I? He says, what am I? Ma'ani. In other words, without being connected to community, we're less than our full human potential. That's a key message. So, also, Hillel was known for saying famously, Al tifrosh minha, anybody know the Hebrew? Al tifrosh minha tzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. So the community is crucial. So with that being so important in the rabbis' minds, this sentence bothered them. How could you have a sentence of Torah, right, that says this question in the wrong way? Well, it's impossible. So it must be there to teach us something. And it's there to teach us that they bring the parable then of the 4 sons. The first son who asks us a very detailed, scholarly question. And the second son is just saying, what's this to you? Right? Look how the inflection is, right? What does this mean to you? he's obviously, when you have that kind of intonation, he's excluding himself. And so the rabbis say in the Haggadah, in the telling of that story, you're supposed to slap him, basically the equivalent of like slapping him in the face. The literal expression is breaking his teeth. Although I'm not going to take his teeth out, but there's an expression that gives for that when we're struggling to say the sounds of Hebrew. They say, break your teeth on the Hebrew. but you're supposed to give him a stern reprimand. Why? Because he has violated, the text of the Haggadah tells us something very interesting there. A beautiful, beautiful, important rabbinic phrase. Because hu kofer et ha'ikar. He is uprooting a fundamental principle, right? A fundamental principle. He's uprooting that principle by asking the question, by merely asking the question in such an arrogant way. He deserves rebuke because he is uprooting a fundamental principle, the principle of community. And so that's why the rabbis, being bothered by that, they went into that whole polemic in the Haggadah. And if you look in a traditional Haggadah, I have one in my car, the old Maxwell. Now they put new versions out every year. Anybody see the new version of Maxwell? They give them through Publix this year. I don't know if they have any left, but they're always nicely colored and everything. It's a traditional full Orthodox Seder, a traditional Seder. The Haggadah, the telling of that story. And that's the exact language that you would find in that section if you read that about that son. So, what do you say? You answer, it's the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. And notice the word Asher Pasach. So that's very, very old then. That goes back, that word Pesach basically goes back at least, we're talking 3,000 years. That one word is quite interesting. So the people bow down in homage. And then basically here you have the events that are unfolding. Pharaoh rose in the night and they let out a loud cry because there was no house where there wasn't at least someone who was dead. The firstborn of all of the Egyptians and the animals as well. And so he told the Israelites, all right, enough, just go. Take your flocks and your herds, as you said, everything you said, and by the way, don't forget to give me a blessing, in verse 32. So, they took their dough and their kneading bowls before it was leavened. They didn't have time to bake the bread, and hence that's why we have the unleavened bread. And then they go out, and if you'll go ahead on page 389, you'll have a very beautiful phrase, a very important phrase. They had been in Egypt 430 years, and at the end of that year, they departed. And that night prior to the departure, that night where so many things were happening, there was peril for the Egyptians, of course. All of the firstborn were being killed. It's called Leil Shimurim, right? Leil Shimurim Hu Ladonai. It's a night of watchfulness for the Lord. To bring them out of the land of Egypt. In that night, in that particular night, Halayla Hazeh. Remember so it's sort of reminiscent. Halayla, right? Halayla Hazeh, Kulo, Maro, etc. So you see how they take certain phrases then, and then build it into the Haggadah from the Torah, the portion here. And then they say something that is relevant to our Haftorah. We'll sort of mention it right now, that the Passover offering has to be eaten in a state of ritual purification, and part of that for a Jew is that there needs to be, for a male, needs to be circumcision. So, for example, foreigners in the biblical times were not allowed, but if a slave had been bought, once he'd been circumcised, then he could participate in it. And This was a communal type of offering there. Again, but if someone comes in as a visitor and then wants to participate in this, then all the men would be circumcised. And no, it specifically says that then again, and by the way, after that, in a sense, that was the equivalent in those days, the circumcision was the equivalent today of naturalization of citizenship, right? Now, if you tried to have that instituted in the United States for all male foreigners coming to the United States now, that would be quite an item of discussion. But in a way, if you look back on the biblical time, right? You want to become a citizen of Jewish people, want to be part of our people, then the men needed to be circumcised. That's just the way it was. And at that point, they would be getting their not just their green papers, but their identity, their passport, right? Let's find that. That's at the end of verse 48, basically here. He would be like a citizen of the country, having the equivalent of a passport. But again, they reiterated that an uncircumcised male would not be able to participate in that offering. And then there's one of my favorite lines here in all of Torah, and it's worth making a separate rabbinic commentary on. And that is verse 49. Verse 49 on page 390. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew and then give a translation in English. And then I'm giving you a heads up. We're going to ask Toby, as our resident present attorney here, to give us his legal interpretation informally. Okay. So, and then the question is, Toby, what legal principle is enumerated in this law? Now he's really looking ahead. Page 390, verse 49. Torah achat yela ezrach v'lager hagar b'tochachem, which translates as, there shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. So you have the same kind of law for the citizen, l'ezrach, v'lager, to the stranger. The ger in this case is a stranger, a non-foreign resident, basically. Hagar b'tochachem. So this ger would be the equivalent of a green card holder in today's, even if we by analogy, right? They have permission to be there. They're not a citizen, though. They would not be considered an Israelite at that point. So, Toby, as promised, we'll ask you the question: what principle of law relative to American casuistry would this principle invoke?
Well, uniformity. Everybody's got to obey the same law.
That's correct. Uniformity of application, right? Uniformity of law. Actually, you have in theory, the same law that is applicable, and then in practice, you would have it uniformly, hopefully, applied. And another word for that, sometimes the classical word for that, not how it's used in the modern context now, sometimes misinterpreted and misapplied, I must say. But what is the classical one word for that in legal terms? The principle of begins with EQ.
Equality? Equity?
Close. Equity. Right. Yes, Wayne was thinking the same thing. So, okay, now, since you mentioned the word, you mentioned it, Toby. Can you give us a distinction between equality and equity now? I'm not going to offer, I'd like you to see how you would make that distinction for us.
Well, I read a lot of people make the distinction. They say equality is supposed to be from one individual to the other, and they're complaining that some people are promoting equity, which means you do whatever you can to promote equality within groups or between groups. So,
okay, in other words, what you said is the idea of equality first means that basically everyone, if I'm understanding you, everyone has in theory, an equal fair shot. Right. That's supposed to be the concept of equality. And then you said in the modern interpretation, sometimes they're taking the concept of equity and saying that means that even though everyone should not only have a fair shot, but they should all be equal in terms of what their end result is.
Groups should be equal.
Yes, the groups as a whole should be equal. So thank you. So in other words, we have the shift in some of our modern thinking then from the individual to the group thinking. But biblically, that's not the case. It's really applied on an individual level. So I wanted to be able to point that out to you there. And do we have any questions, any comments on that? We had some very interesting ideas. Yes, Wayne?
Is this where the founders of the Declaration and Constitution came up with all men are created equal?
So for the sake of those watching on the internet and the live streaming and the YouTube, let me repeat the question. And it's a very, very excellent question. He said, is this then where the concept of equality, as it is embodied in the Declaration of Independence, has its original source? Did I represent that question fairly? Okay, good. And I would certainly say that this is certainly one of the passages in which the overall value concepts of that equality was based, as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. From a legal point of view, I think that this is one of the sources for that. Yes, it would be one of the sources, because it has the concept of, as we were talking there with Toby, it's applied to the individual equality on the legal level, on the legal level, that each person is considered to have both the rights and the responsibilities meted out to them on an equal basis. But in further response to your question, I would also say that it goes much deeper. The founders of the Constitution had a deep reverence for the concept of God and for the concept of biblical values as a whole. And so it probably even goes back to the story of creation of Adam and Eve. The primordial human beings created by God in the Garden of Eden, and derived also from that. Yes?
I would beg to differ.
Oh, okay. For those watching, he says he begs to differ. That's interesting. Good.
Creation
Yes.
says man and woman.
Okay.
This says only the circumcised, the men.
Yes. Okay. So he says creation says man and woman, and this says only men. So then I would respond to Wayne's comment in response in debate style. That's what the rabbis do. One person says one thing, and another person says the other. They go back and forth. They go back and forth and work out the idea. That's the process of what they call in the Talmud that give and take. So basically, I would say that's why in the Declaration of Independence, precisely, I would use that argument to support the creation story, because all people are created equal. This passage only talks about males, as you pointed out. But the Declaration of Independence says all people are created equal, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all humans are created equal. No?
I believe it's all men. It's all men.
As a matter of fact, it's correct. I stand corrected. That all men are created equal. You see, so this is where certain people would want to update okay, now we have to call upon Toby's expertise. Okay, you guys got me. You tripped me. That's right. You tripped me up in front of the national and international audience here. Okay, so I'm going to say here's where we need Toby's help. How was the concept then of that Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, later extended throughout law to be all people?
Well, the Constitution had to be amended.
Yes, 14th Amendment.
19th, I believe. Well, first the black people got in with the 13th, and the women with the 19th.
Yes, okay. So because we just like the Torah, right? Although some would say the Torah Timimahu, so the Torah is perfect. We just don't understand it correctly. But the idea is that certainly we interpret the Torah on an ongoing basis. So too the Constitution was interpreted and amended. So I think that's an answer we could all feel comfortable with and sleep with. Is it? I see Wayne's hand nodding. Yes, yeah, good. Yes, further comment?
Well, the fact is, the Declaration of Independence cannot be changed.
Right.
The Constitution was written so it could be changed.
Yes, that's exactly right. A great point. Great point. He said the Declaration of Independence was written so it would not be changed. That's right. That's immutable. Once it was written, it was written. But the Constitution itself allowed for amendment. So by that analogy, we could say the rabbis who interpret the Torah are really following that kind of amending process or explication. It's the ongoing process of explication, which traditional teaching says, actually, believe it or not, traditional teaching holds that possibility for continual instruction is in fact embedded in the Torah itself, in the language of Moses when he speaks to the Israelites. Because the traditional notion of Judaism has the concept of the written Torah. The Torah shebichtav, katav, midashon, from the root katav, meaning to write, and the oral Torah, Torah shebe'al peh, meaning mouth. And so traditional theology even incorporates a parallel idea. Yes?
A sequitur.
Okay, a sequitur, he says.
The Torah says you do not cook the lamb in its mother's milk. The Talmud has changed that to mean had interpreted it to mean you don't mix milk and meat. But Jews in India that traveled to India before the rabbis came into existence do cook their meat and milk.
So that's very interesting. What I'm going to do is, before getting into the whole discussion of kashrut, which will be an upcoming Torah portion, I'm just going to share for our listening audience what Wayne said there, which is very, very interesting. And that is that the Torah does have the line that is usually translated as you should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And yet pointed out that in India, the Jews who came, and then the rabbis, the next step was that the rabbis interpreted that we don't mix milk and meat products, or milk and meat at all. But the Jews of India don't do that, and they actually do cook lamb in milk.
But not their mothers.
But not. Okay, they separate the lineage, but they do mix the milk and the meat. So the reason that Wayne shared with us that happened in India is because that was a practice that developed, I guess, pre-rabbinic times before the rabbis went over there. The question is then, did they keep that or did they change it later? So that's an interesting question. We will reserve a full discussion on that, because I have another theory that can be added to that also makes a different understanding of the original meaning of the original sentence, but that's a different sermon. So you'll allow me to not discuss that today, please. Otherwise, we won't get to Kaddish for Dan's father until 3 o'clock, and that wouldn't be good. So, but I want to point us now to the Haftorah. To the Haftorah for today, and I do let's say you don't know what Haftorah is read today. You go to the index here on the Roman numeral 12. The first Haftorah we had, remember, for Passover, we have 5 really different Haftorahs before the first day of Passover. Shabbat Shkalim, let's review. That's where you brought the half a shekel. Shabbat Zachor, you remember Amalek as he pursued the remnant of the Jews, attacking the women and children going out of Israel. Shabbat Parah, for purification. You have to eat the sacrifice in a ritual state of purity. The ritual, remember we talked about the ritual of the red heifer. For those who weren't here, it's on the internet. It goes Parashat HaChodesh, the month, the Shabbat, the beginning Shabbat of the month of Nisan. Shabbat HaGadol, the Shabbat immediately prior to Passover, and now the Pesach first day on page 1299. Page 1299. So we'll invite you to turn to that page. And as we discussed for our Torah reading, Basically, there were some key ideas here. The concept of purity. Purify yourselves, and that's what Joshua did for people coming into the land of Israel there. This is the first official Pesach that they were able to celebrate. And again, you have the fact that many of those who were wandering in the desert, the males, during those 40 years they've been born in the desert, they were wandering, they didn't have a chance to be circumcised. So we have a new generation. And prior to eating of the Passover sacrifice in the land of Israel, the males had to be circumcised. And indeed, it was done with the old flint knives. Okay? So for those unfamiliar with metallurgy, why flint? For that matter, what are some of the earliest recognitions you can think of when you think of flint and human civilization? And, pardon me?
Hardness?
Well, actually, not necessarily. I don't think the hardness per se. Maybe closer to the opposite, actually, in terms of hardness. Durability to a degree, but something else. Sharpness. Flint, to the best of my knowledge, is able to be chipped off. Think of primitive man chipping off this particular kind of rock, and it would go off in these flaky sections and leave a sharp edge. And also with flint, there is another property which allowed them then to make fire, namely the magnetic aspect of it. So occasionally you would get sparks then from flint. No? Oh, wait a minute. Now, here I have to be very careful. I forgot for a moment. We have a metallurgical chemist here. No, I'm sorry.
That's an organic. I'm not.
Okay, but you are, wait a minute. We have a chemist.
Yes.
Okay, so the properties of flint, is it not doesn't it create sparks?
No.
Oh.
There have been many archaeological demonstrations of chipping off the flint.
Yes.
And I've never seen one spark.
Well, then maybe what happens is they take the flint and they rub it on another kind of rock surface that has iron ore.
The iron would produce sparks, yes.
There we go. So that's what they do. So the flint is able to be chipped off. The flint is able to be chipped off with sharp edges. So it could be used for a knife. That's how they do it. That's how they did it. I'm glad they don't do that anymore. Okay. And then I just want to point out here, in line 7 on page 1301. So, actually the end of line 6, saying how the previous generation, because they had not shown faithfulness at all times, was not allowed to see the land of Israel, the land Eretz Zvat Chalav Udvash, flowing with milk and honey, but raised up their sons in their stead. After they were circumcised, then they were able to do it. And there is a mysterious line. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have in this Galoti et charpat Mitzrayim me'alechem, I have rolled away from you the disgrace of Egypt. And because Galoti is related to the word Gilgal, that's why they place the basically turning or the rolling away. Gilgal, that's why they named that place Gilgal, which is according to the biblical text remained till this day. However, it's pointed out in the commentary that sometimes the Egyptians themselves may have engaged in circumcision. Interesting if that's true, but they probably did it a different way. And it was certainly done differently. So that's still how they would call it the disgrace. Okay, and the end of the Haftorah, then you talk about the Passover offering. And then they talk about Joshua encountering an angel. But at first he's not sure if it's an angel or a man, but he's threatening. He's holding a flaming sword. Actually, is it flaming? Let's see. Sending a sword drawn. No, it's not flaming. This is not a flaming sword, but it's a drawn sword. Charbo shlufa beyado, and he says one of the famous lines. He says, "Halanu ata im letzarenu." Halanu, are you to us? Are you with us? Are you one of our group? Im litzarenu, or are you an enemy? Are you a foe? So that was one of the lines that Rabbi Ben Zion Bergman wanted us to memorize. Halanu ata im litzarenu. Are you a friend or foe? That would be the equivalent, right? Are you friend or foe? And he turns out to be an angel. And just as you have holy space here entering the concept now, he's just like Moses at the burning bush. Now Joshua is given this special visitation. What does this do? What is the purpose of adding that little story about Joshua with the angel here? What, for the student or the reader or the Israelite readings and hearing this story, what does it do? What does it confer upon Joshua?
Jericho's the capital.
Well, we're not talking about really Jericho so much. Well, what does this say about the? I mean, it is. Yes, they are encircling Jericho. They will be encircling Jericho. That's at the last line. Yes, but what does it say about Joshua in terms of his leadership? Consecration, exactly. The consecration of his leadership. In other words, just as Moses had this special conversation with divinity, with God on Mount Sinai, and was commanded to take off his sandals because he was standing on holy ground. And then Joshua, what did Joshua do? Excuse me, what did Moses do to Joshua before Moses died? What did he do? That's right. He conferred, he passed on that leadership to Joshua. Right? The laying on of the hands, and blessed Joshua. And then what did he do to the people? When he did that, as he did that, what did he say to the people? Anybody remember? He said, "This is now your guy. This is now your leader. Revere him as you revered me." So it's the human ceremony of transference of leadership. And now you have the divine moment of consecration, where Joshua is encountering this angel, and he's telling him to take off your shoes. This place you stand on, it's holy. It's holy ground. It's separate ground. And before even doing anything else, Joshua threw himself face down, says, prostrated himself. What does the Lord command his servant? And he said, take off your sandals for the feet, because this place is holy. And that's the moment of divine consecration. I like that word, Toby. Thank you. Divine consecration there. Divine appointment for Joshua in God's eyes, that then gives legitimacy for Joshua as a leader. It legitimizes his place in the chain of leadership. Yes, question, Wayne.
One last question.
Sure. Doesn't have to be your last. I won't hold it to you. What is we're going to improvise here. What is Passover about? In many ways, Passover is about asking questions. Man, right? What do the kids do? They ask questions.
If the area around Jericho is holy ground, and Joshua is commanded to take off his sandals, that's what they said. That if you read it, near Jericho.
Well, it was just, to be more exact, the place where at that moment Joshua was standing was holy ground. So that you could ask yourself, why was it holy ground?
No. When the Jews attacked Jericho, did they do it barefoot?
They didn't have to, because the whole land wasn't considered per se. I mean, yes, yeah. That same prohibition, that was because I would suggest the presence of the angel in that spot. It wasn't the ground inherently, although you could say, later on, people feel that there's an inherent holiness to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel itself. That's why for many mortuaries, they bring a little vial of good business, So take a shovel, put them in little packages, sell holy land, right? But, it has that meaning for us. It's put in the casket, right? So some do the holy water, too. That's a little different story, But you have that aspect of the holiness of the land. But that was really sort of probably as it developed later on. So at that moment, it was really, I would suggest, the presence of the angel himself that made that place holy and sacred. That the angel brought the holiness to the place, rather than being an inherent holiness on that square foot. Because, of course, the siege of Jericho, we don't talk about it too much here. They do say, I'll give you the phrase that Rabbi Ben Zion Bergman, Alav Shalom, always wanted us to memorize this also. So what was Jericho? V'Yericho, sogeret u'misugeret. So it was surrounded and really encircled. In other words, like, unfortunately, this is happening in many Ukrainian cities today, right? It's the war of siege, right? War by siege, war by attrition for the population, starvation for the population. So Jericho was sogeret, umisogeret, right? It was really tightly encircled, right? Trapped. That having been said, I'm going to try the Haftorah. Unless anyone else wants to. Okay. That will be found with the blessings preceding on page
326 in our Siddur.
Thank you so much. Page 326. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim v'ratzah v'divrehem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Vayomer Yoshua, I'm sorry, page 1300. Vayomer Yoshua elam hitkadashu ki machar yaseh Adonai b'kirbechem niflaot. Vayomer Yoshua el hakohanim leimor su el Aron habrit ve'ivru lifnei ha'am vayisu et Aron habrit vayelchu lifnei ha'am. Vayomer Adonai el Yoshua hayom hazeh Achel gadelecha b'nei kol Yisrael asher yed'un ki kasher hayiti im Moshe eye imach ve'tahi amar Adonai el Yoshua Ose lecha harvot turim v'shuv mol et bnei Yisrael shenit vayas lo Yoshua harvot turim vayamal et bnei Yisrael el givat ha'aralot v'zeh hadavar asher mal Yoshua kol ha'am ha'yotzei Mitzrayim hazcharim kol anshe hamilchama mi'et bamidbar b'derech b'tzeitam mi'mitzrayim ki mulim hayu kol ha'am hayotzim b'chol ha'am Halilodim bamidbar b'derech b'tzeitam mi'mitzrayim lo malu ki 40 shana halchu b'nei Yisrael bamidbar atom kol hagoy ansher hamilchama yotzim mi'mitzrayim asher lo sham'u b'kol Adonai asher nishba Adonai lahem levilti הראותם את הארץ אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותם לתת לנו ארץ זבת חלב ודבש. את בניהם הקים תחתם אותם מל יהושע, כי ערלים היו, כי לא מלו אותם בדרך. ויהי כאשר תמו כל הגוי להימול, וישבו תחתם במחנה עד חיותם. ויאמר אדוני אל יהושע, היום כלותי את חרפת מצרים מעליכם. ויקרא שם המקום ההוא גלגל עד היום הזה. ויחנו בני ישראל בגלגל, ויעשו את הפסח ב14 יום לחודש, בערב בערבות יריחו. ויאכלו מעבור הארץ ממחרת הפסח מצות וקלוי בעצם היום הזה. וישבות המן ממחרת ואוכלם מעבור הארץ. לא היה עוד לבני ישראל מן, ויאכלו מתבואת ארץ כנען בשנה ההיא. ויהי מיות יהושע ביריחו, וישא עיניו וירא, והנה איש עומד לנגדו, וחרבו שלופה בידו. וילך ליהושע אליו, ויאמר לו, הלנו אתה אם לצרינו. ויאמר לו, כי אני צר צבא אדוני, אתה באתי. ויפול יהושע על פניו ארצה וישתחו. ויאמר לו, מה אדוני מדבר אל עבדו? ויאמר, צר צבא אדוני אל יהושע, סר נעליך מעל רגליך, כי המקום אשר אתה עומד עליו קודש הוא. ויעש יהושע כן. יריחו סוגרת ומסוגרת מפני בני ישראל, אין יוצא ואין בא. ויהי אדוני את יהושע, ויהי שמעו בכל הארץ. And on page 326, we have then the conclusion of the blessing here after the Haftarah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, צור כל העולמים, צדיק כל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו הם בצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי בית חיינו, ולאלופת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך ומלכות בית דוד משיחך במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו על כיסא לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו עוד האחרים את כבודו כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד. על התורה ועל עבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש Shabbat. Actually, I made a little boo-boo. Let me do that paragraph again on page 328 at the bottom, because we have a special ending for Pesach. Al Torah ve'al avodah ve'al nevi'im ve'al yom haShabbat hazeh Chag hamatzot hazeh. שנתת לנו אדוני אלינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לששון לשמחה לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת בישראל והזמנים. Amen. And so at this point, we're going to have a blessing for those who are ill. Today I'm going to take rabbinic liberty here because my voice is being challenged today. I am going to just go directly to the Misha Berach list. First, I'll read the names that we have, and then we'll go to any of you who may have some to add. Barbara Allman, Steve Asheim, Mona Bachov, Sawyer Bartel, Teresa Kalla, Emilia Cooley, Audrey Dash, Bruce Dash, Gordon Feinberg, Carla Gonzalez, Jeffrey Greenwald, Alan Jacobs, Rita Kindle, Keoth Langston, Steve Lifshin, Robert Maya, Sandy Minkin, Morris Rashi, Dom Salfi, Rob Seltzer, Harleen Schreck, Leslie Sulsinger, Isri Sigmund, Saul Stein, Andrea Diane Sylvester, Bill Thompson, Peter Teitelbaum, Nancy Town, Herb Weissman, Suzette Weissman, Katerina Williams, Label Ben Margolit, Liebe Shlomit Rachel Bat Margolit, Bible Shlomo Ben Devorah, Israel Ben Etel, and Avram Ben Binyamin. So let's start here. Tom, you have another name to add?
Jeff Dunn.
Okay. Toby?
Tom Rapsadara, Eric Lindstrom.
Okay. Okay. Any to add? Oh, but Dan.
Tony Lagardo.
Okay. Thank you. Jeff. Sure. Okay. Very good. So I'm going to just read the actually on the last cover here, and then we can just sort of end this with the final paragraph there. Mishaber Avotenu Mekor Habracha Avotenu. So those who blessed our mothers, the source of blessing for our fathers, bless those in need of healing with Refuah Shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit. And let us say, Amen. And we're going to continue now, going directly to the Musaf service. So here's where I'm going to myself rely on our table of contents because it's a little different for the Sabbath here. It's for the festival. So the Musaf Regalim, actually this morning there's a shift, there's a change upon a change. Namely, we'll invite you to turn to page 498. Page 498, and I'll explain the reason here. The reason that we do this a little differently on this Shabbat is because starting in essence with the second day, it's recited on today, but in Musaf. But then starting tomorrow, we no longer recite the phrase Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem to the God who causes rain to fall and the wind to blow and the rain to fall. In Israel, they need rain during the winter season, especially snow, to build up for the hot climate and the hot weather that is there during the summertime and in the spring. But crucial to that is the fact that you nonetheless have dew, a condensation. That's very important for agriculture in Israel, the blessing of the dew. So it's on this day that you say that blessing, and that's added to the Amidah. It's called Tefillat Tal. Sometimes cantors will make a whole very beautiful setting for that. But we're just going to give you an excerpt here today from the English, and then we're going to go back to where it says the note that you go back to it'll be page 439. So first what we're going to do is we're going to start on page 498 with the interpretive opening blessing, and we'll invite, please, everyone to rise. And this time we will face our our eastern wall. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומר חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיים מתים אתה רב להושיע. And then I think it would be very meaningful to read this in English, because the Hebrew is very complex. So our God and God of our ancestors. Let's do this responsively by stanza. Dew, precious dew, upon your land reborn, bestow blessing in your exaltation. Strengthen us with ample wine and corn. Give your beloved city firm foundation with dew. Dew, precious dew, may abundance our year adorn. Let proud and glorious fruit cover the land. May the city that was like an empty sukkah forlorn be a crown of beauty in your land by dew. Dew, precious dew, drop upon the blessed earth. From heaven's treasury be this accorded. So shall the darkness to light give birth. Your faithful people shall be rewarded with dew. Dew, precious dew, make the mountains' growth sweet, the taste of your excellence recalling. Deliver us from distress, we entreat, so may we sing your praises softly falling as dew. Dew, precious dew, our granaries fill, renew our days as of your beloved God. Uphold us at your will, like a watered garden, do us restore with dew. Dew, precious dew, give us our harvest to reap. Keep our flocks and herds from leanness. Behold your people you tenderly led like sheep. Look to you to give the earth her greenness with dew. That was translation by Israel Zangwell here. And then we have the continuing phrase, Sha'ata Adonai Eloheinu, Mashiv HaRuach Umorid Hatav. For you are the Lord our God, who causes the wind to blow and the dew to descend. Let's read this responsively here. You can respond with the amens at the bottom of page 501 on the left. For a blessing and not for a curse. Amen. For life and not for death. Amen. For abundance and not for famine. Amen. And we can say amen. And Just before, while you're still standing, but before we turn back to page 439 there, I want to just draw your attention there to basically here, the very, very top of the page, where it says, drop upon the blessed earth, from heaven's treasury be this accorded. I wonder if Shakespeare ever saw this passage when he was talking about, in The Merchant of Venice, the idea of rain not being put through like like a filter, like I'm trying to think of the word he used, a sieve. So page 439 will continue. מלכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמנת לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. And we continue on page 340. נעריצך ונקדישך, כסוד שיח, שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך על הארץ כבודו, כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים, ויכון עם יחדים שמו, ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה, שמה אומרים, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hu Eloheinu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu Mosheinu, Hu Yashmi'enu Barachamav Shenit, Lenei Kol Chai, Leolachem Lelohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. Adir Adirenu, Adonai Adonenu, Ma'adir Shimcha B'chol Ha'aretz, Vaya Adonai Lemelech Al Kol Ha'aretz, Vayomahu Hi Adonai Echad, ושמו אחד, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך קדוש לקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. And we continue individually through the remainder of the Amidah. continue now on page 456 with the Reader's Kaddish. יתקדש ויתקדש שמי רבה. בעלמא דברה חילותי והמליך מלכותי וחייכונו ביום יחונה וחי לכל בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח יפאר ולמען ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו ליעלה מן כל ברכתה ושכתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן אמן תתקבל סליחון וברכות לכל ישראל קדם אבנו ושמעיה ואמרו אמן אמן יהי שלום רמיים שמעיה וחגים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן אמן עושה שלום ממרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן amen. And at this time I'm going to invite everyone to please rise, face our eastern wall, therefore the Aleinu. Aleinu Lisha, page 480. Aleinu Lishabeach Ladon HaKol, Latet Gudula Leotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kagoyei Haratzot, Velo Samanu Kimishmechot HaAdama, Shelo Samchel Kenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol HaMonam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומושב קרוב השמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגלבי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו ודעת היום והשבותה אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד על כן On page 42, כי המלכות שלך היא רמיית ימלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו Echad. And please be seated. So, it's often my custom before going into the recitation of the Kaddish prayer to ask those who may basically have a yortzeit of a beloved one to maybe say a thought or two on their life or a lesson of their legacy that might be of interest or inspiration to the congregation. So on this Shabbat, the first one on our list here is the yortzeit of Richard Williams, who was the father of Daniel Williams, alav shalom. And I just want to, no obligation to say anything, but if some people like to, sometimes I offer it. So would you like to say anything, Dan? You can even come up here if you'd like. No? Okay. Okay. We're going to go on to mention then the name of Sylvia Zlatkis, who was the mother of Jared Zlatkis, and then Minnie Weinstein, the mother of Stephen Weinstein, and then Lawrence Zlatkis, who was the brother who was the brother of Jared Zlatkis. Jared Zlatkis. So both his mother and brother evidently passed roughly on the same time. Excuse me. That's actually for the following week, Lawrence Zlatkis. The ones here just are this week is Richard Williams, Sylvia Zlatkis, and then Minnie Weinstein. I didn't realize how that was written here. So for those reciting Kaddish then, either by virtue of observing a yortzeit or because you are reciting Kaddish throughout the year following the passing of a loved one, we continue now on page 486, as I will lead in that for those here and for those on the internet. Yitkadash ויתגדל ויתקדש שמרבה. בעלמא תברא חירותי, וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. May God grant comfort to all of us who mourn. May the memory of those for whom we mourn remain among us as a living, loving, and inspiring benediction. And let's say amen. And at this time I'd like to call upon Tom, our president, to come forward and share any thoughts you may have.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for being here. Chag Sameach to everyone. Happy Pesach. Rabbi, thank you so much for leading us another beautiful service today. Please join us again next weekend as we'll have the concluding services for Pesach. And again, we'll be here with Rabbi Barnett, and we will have a Yizkor service on Saturday the 23rd. And please mark your calendars for May 15th. It's the day of our Lag Bomar picnic. Right now we have a pavilion rented at Wekiva Springs State Park. It should be a fun day for everyone, so please mark your calendars so you can join us. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much there, Tom. Appreciate that. And this time we're going to continue with the concluding hymn, page 488, Adon Olam. And we'll just do the first stanza and then the concluding one. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra li'et nasa b'chefzo kol azai melech shemo nikra biyado avkid ruchi v'eti shan ve'ahira v'im ruchi gviati Adonai li velo ira. First we say, actually you say for the Shabbat first. So Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. And I want to thank everyone who was able to be here today to help make our minyan.